Okay, so let's talk about when oxygen is not present. What kind of situation would that be? For one, holding your breath. So remember those games you used to play when you were a kid, hopefully not, where you'd hold your breath to see if you could pass out. Well, your body finally shuts you down because you're being an idiot, and it knows that if it passes you out, you will breathe. Because when your oxygen is missing, lots of bad things can happen, including the death of brain cells, and this is why. So can you see here in this diagram where oxygen is absolutely necessary? Hopefully you can see that it's right here. Oxygen is the driving force behind the electron transport chain. So if oxygen is missing, then this protein never misses its electrons, which means that this one never misses it, and this one, and this one, and this one. So it completely shuts down the electron transport chain. Now, if the electron transport chain is shut down, then no NADHs are being relieved of their electrons. And so as a consequence, the citric acid cycle shuts down because there's no need to make more NADH. If this shuts down, then the acetyl-CoA begins to build up and this process shuts down. And so as a consequence, these pyruvates have nowhere to go. So the entire process happening within the mitochondria shuts down when no oxygen is present. Can we get ATP any other way? Well, yes, we get these two little net ATP, because you put two in, two net ATP out of glycolysis. And so the body, in a last-ditch effort, will do glycolysis on every glucose molecule until you run out of glucose molecules. Now, remember, this only gives you 2 ATP per glucose molecule versus 36 if the whole process was happening. And so it's a very inefficient way of using glucose, but it will keep you alive for, maybe, how long can you hold your breath? A couple minutes, maybe? It will keep you alive. And what happens is glycolysis occurs, you get these 2 pyruvates, you get 2 ATP, which your body quickly uses to keep your brain alive, and you make 1 NADH. And technically it's 2. Regardless, the NADH with the stored electrons has nowhere to go because the electron transport chain isn't functioning. So instead, it takes its electrons, and I should draw this in orange, it takes its electrons and it puts them right back on to the pyruvate molecule. And that changes the pyruvate molecule into something else. It changes it into, you've probably heard of this before, lactic acid. Okay, and that's what begins to build up in your body if this process is happening. And so lactic acid is thick like bacon grease. And so if you like running around, you're running faster, you're moving your muscles faster than you can breathe to get oxygen to your cells, and then your muscles begin to do just this process and they build up lactic acid. And then if you just sit down immediately afterwards, that lactic acid, it'll thicken, it'll solidify as it cools, and that's what makes your muscles stiff. Now the ripping of muscle is actually what makes you sore, but the stiffness is from the lactic acid. So if you move around and let circulation take care of it, and you start breathing again and stop working so hard, that will circulate out of your system. But this can only happen for so long before you run out all of your glucose stores and then you die. So this process, when you're just using glycolysis, we actually don't call it glycolysis, we call it fermentation. Okay, now yeast and other things like that can do fermentation as well. The difference is when they put the electrons back on, they create a slightly different molecule. They create ethanol, alcohol, and that's how we make alcohol. But in our bodies, we create lactic acid instead of alcohol. So that's fermentation, and that happens when oxygen is absent.